Chapter 2 A Wandering Aramaean. Abraham's Story. The story of the early church is just one example of God sending His people. God's movement of sending is throughout the Bible, from Genesis to Revelation. God places Adam and Eve in a garden and gives them a mission to tend it. God sends Moses to Pharaoh to plead for the release of the Hebrew slaves. God sends His people from slavery to the Promised Land. God sends David to fight Goliath. We are in some ways used to the language of calling, but we can forget that a calling always requires the one being called to take action, to go. God always sends the one called to a particular people for a particular task. Think of the call of Samuel, who was sent as a prophet to the people. Think of the call of Isaiah, who is sent to proclaim God's message. Over a number of years, I've been drawn to the story of Abraham, and I believe it is one of the most helpful biblical stories when thinking about ascending God in our current culture. Three features of Abraham's story make it helpful for today. 1, he doesn't know where he is going. 2, he doesn't know when God's promise will be fulfilled, and it all takes a really long time. 3, he and his family are very human. Where am I going? Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you." Genesis 12:1. This is perhaps the ultimate example of God sending someone. God shows up in Abraham's life. This all took place before God had changed his name from Abram to Abraham. And with no context or conversation, God tells him to go. 3 verses later, we discover that Abraham does it, seemingly with no questions asked. So Abram went, as the Lord told him. What is amazing to me is that Abram has no clue where he is going. God gives him no direction other than what is found in verse 1. God will show Abraham the land that he is going to give to him and his descendants. That's it. When you stop and think about what is going on here, it is pretty massive. This is the first mention in the Bible of the Promised Land. This land will dominate so much of the Bible's attention. This land will be the source of hope for the Hebrew slaves. This land will be fought over and protected. The future Israelites will be exiles from this land and will long for a return to it. They will return and rebuild it, but it will be lost to world superpowers, Greece, and then Rome. Throughout its history, this land will continue to be sought after as a place of holiness. As we know today, the Promised Land is still a place which people of varying religions and cultures claim as their own, all because God said to Abraham, "Go." You may claim that you don't usually hear God speaking. It's fine for Abraham to hear God, but that is not an everyday occurrence for most of us. Here's the thing. There is nothing in the scriptures that indicates that this was an everyday occurrence for Abraham either. This is actually why I love this story so much. The way the story reads, it sounds as if this all happened in one afternoon. God said, "Go to a land that I will show you." And Abraham essentially said, "Okay," and started packing his things. Maybe that is exactly what happened. Or maybe what is recorded as a quick conversation was actually several years of sensing something, or months of Abraham trying to ignore a feeling nagging away at him. Maybe Abraham and his wife Sarah had conversation after conversation about moving. Maybe they were already resolved to leave Haran, but just needed assurance that God would guide them in the journey. If we take the Bible at face value, the first time Abraham heard from God is the year that he turned 75. When we say, "God doesn't speak to me," consider the actual story that is told in Scripture. Abraham's adventures in being sent started at 75. Who knows what God has in store for you? Well, God does. I just love the way God works. So unexpected.